Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. Before I begin today, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I want to reaffirm the Green Party's commitment to the truth and reconciliation process, which is so vital to dismantling the legacy of colonialism and systemic racism. I also want to just take a moment to offer my deepest sympathies to everyone who's lost a loved one during the COVID pandemic. We reached a sad milestone this week with 10,000 Ontarians now who have lost their lives due to the COVID pandemic. It's a tragedy that's heartbreaking, and it touches each and every one of us, and it's affected us in many ways. And one of those ways is the housing affordability crisis that's been building over the last 3 decades, but has really reached a breaking point during the pandemic. It's intensified the existing crisis and highlighted just how important it is to do everything we can to ensure that everyone in Ontario has an affordable place to call home. Ontario's housing affordability crisis is happening in communities across this province. It takes the average worker, minimum wage worker, 63 hours of work to afford a one-bedroom apartment in Barrie, 55 hours in Kingston. In Toronto, over half the city's population are no longer able to afford a one-bedroom apartment. It takes the average Ontarian 15 years to save for the down payment to buy a house. And according to yesterday's Auditor General's report, the wait time to access social housing, depending on where you live in the province, ranges from 2 to 12 years. And I can say my own experience is that my constituency office, like many MPPs across the province, one of the biggest issues we deal with are trying to help people who are on that wait list find a place to call home. Every night, sadly, 9,600 Ontarians experience visible homelessness. And throughout the year, that number jumps to 90,000 people. And there's hundreds of thousands of more Ontarians experiencing, quote, invisible homelessness. It's not sustainable, it's not right, and it has to change. Yet, unfortunately, things are only getting worse. Housing costs and rent continue to skyrocket as the government fails to act. We need immediate action to address the housing affordability crisis, which has reached an unacceptable breaking point. Everyone deserves an affordable place to call home, and that's why the Ontario Greens released a housing affordability strategy back in June that some publications have called a masterclass plan. It's a top priority for us. And yesterday, I tabled a motion that contains some of the core elements of that plan. I'm calling on the government to immediately implement a plan to address the housing affordability crisis by aggressively investing in affordable rental housing and attainable home ownership, including but not limited to building 100,000 affordable housing rental spaces over the next decade, extending financial supports to 311,000 Ontarians to help with housing cost, building 60,000 permanent supportive housing spaces with wraparound mental health and addiction supports to help in chronic homelessness, including 22,000 Indigenous-owned and Indigenous-led affordable housing spaces, creating a $100 million seed fund to support co-op housing, to take every opportunity to use provincially owned land to partner with nonprofit and co-op housing providers to build more affordable housing supply, and expanding inclusionary zoning laws to new developments. That's what a real plan for real action on the housing crisis looks like. And I call on my colleagues from all parties in this legislature to come together and work on an aggressive, ambitious, and doable housing affordability strategy and to vote in favor of this motion. You know, the Premier is hosting a housing summit this month. And it seems like maybe the Premier is starting to realize that we have a housing affordability crisis. And if he needs ideas on how to immediately address this crisis, I recommend he look at the Ontario Greens housing affordability strategy, and he passed this motion and a previous motion I've tabled to address the housing affordability crisis in Ontario.